Leonardo da Vinci defined art as cosa mentale, or a mental thing. In other words, art is the visual materialization of whatever was inside the artist's mind at the time they created the piece. Plato defined art as something mimetic, so in other words, mimicry. He believed that art was an imitation of physical objects and therefore second to those objects, a representation of them ultimately serving no function. On the same topic, Picasso stated, "The purpose of art is washing the dust of daily life off our souls." He viewed the question more spiritually. For him, it was almost like a meditation. We have written records dating back at least 2,400 years of people debating the exact definition of art. But keep in mind, that's just what we have a record of. Art as we know it has existed pretty much as long as humans have, and it's likely this debate has been going nearly as long as that. Someone would have to be either extremely stupid or extremely arrogant to think they have a better answer than some of history's most influential artists and scholars. Alright, let's get into it. This channel is gonna take sides, damn it. We're gonna make arguments even if they're wrong. There's nothing worse than fence sitting. Some people think art is everywhere and in everything, and while that sounds nice and flowery, it also means that art is in everywhere and everything. Why even have a word for art if it's just going to be applied so liberally? If everything is art, then nothing is. So then it follows that art is something that can be defined. And while the answer to that question is always going to be somewhat vague and nebulous, we can definitely narrow it down. Now then, unlike the script for this video, our definition needs to be concise. We could have something comprehensive listing every single possible kind of art and why they qualify, but that would obviously be exhausting and would have to be continuously updated to include new art forms as they crop up. For a long time, video games were debated as to whether or not they really count as an art form, which of course they do, but that's not something Plato could have accounted for when he made his definition. For this reason, our definition needs to be future-proof, something that encompasses all current forms of art, but also will encompass future forms of art we can't yet account for. First things first, we need to figure out what even qualifies. I'm not saying anything in this section that most people who might watch this don't already know, but it's good to have a baseline to work off of. When most people hear the term art, they probably think of paintings or drawings, but have you ever noticed when people use the term artist, they're just as likely to be referring to musicians as they are someone who puts ink on a canvas? Regardless, I don't think many people would argue that music and painting both count as art, even though one is visual and one is not. Therefore, it's fair to say that art needs to be a creative expression, and it can't be limited to just one medium. Things like movies and television also ought to be considered art. I don't think anyone is really going to argue with me on that. Performance is also widely considered to be art, acting, dancing, that sort of thing. For some reason, writers are frequently not considered artists, even though there's nothing writers do uniquely different from other non-visual mediums. I don't love the idea that if someone writes a song, it's art, but if someone writes a book, it's not. I get that one is performed and the other isn't, but writing a book or even a half-baked script for a YouTube video nobody's gonna watch is still creative expression all the same. If the only practical difference between a song and a book is the fact that one is performed, then that implies that either A, art has to be visual after all, in other words, you can actually watch the performance, which doesn't work because you can still listen to a song without seeing anything, and it's foolish to argue that music is only art in the context of a live performance, or B, listening to something is a valid form of creative expression, but reading it is not. I don't know about you, but I'm not really seeing a leg for option B to stand on there. Confining art to something you can hear or see but not read is completely arbitrary. Anyways, the reason I go on such a tangent about this in particular is because in the comic book industry, writers and artists are seen as two completely different roles. While I'm not trying to be pedantic about it, although I guess I am being pretty pedantic about it, that's kind of the whole video, both the writer and the artist are expressing themselves creatively. They're both artists. If only we had a term for someone who illustrates, that could clear the whole thing up. Oh well, too bad. So then, we've got a pretty clear idea of what currently existing mediums should count as art, but I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to mention something that definitely shouldn't. I considered having ChatGPT generate something for me to drive this point home, but it turns out the only thing lazier than generating your own AI slop is borrowing someone else's. This is a pretty cold take, but art requires an artist, and simply asking some app to make something for you is no more a creative expression than a client commissioning an actual artist to make something they can't or won't make themselves. If I ask something else to be creative for me, I haven't created art. And if the thing I'm asking is literally incapable of thinking creatively, then there's no actual creative expression occurring. On all levels, generative AI fails to justify itself as a legitimate art form. It's just copying work made by actual creatives, except without all the love and passion that made that art interesting to begin with. It's a knockoff, it's plagiarism, and our definition should exclude it altogether. So we know art is a creative expression, but that's not enough. There are lots of things that are creative expressions, but we probably wouldn't call them art. If you're assembling an IKEA bed frame, that's by definition a creative endeavor, but could hardly be considered art. Maybe the person who designed the bed frame in the first place is an artist, but you just want a bed frame. Maybe you chose a pretty one, but you still picked its appearance from out of a set of pre-made options. At the end of the day, it's a functional affair. If the sole purpose of a creation is its functionality, that misses the point of art. This is definitely a dramatic escalation from a bed frame, but weapons need to be designed too. When you're making, let's say, a bomb, your only concern is going to be that thing's potential to kill your enemies as effectively as possible. I'm probably over-explaining everything already. I'm not going to insult your intelligence by explaining why a bomb doesn't belong under the same umbrella as interpretive dance. It feels odd and maybe a little counterproductive to argue that art must have some kind of designated purpose, but remember that purpose need not be overly specific. The purpose of a bed frame is to hold up your mattress, and the purpose of a bomb is to slaughter as many people as possible. The purpose of art is to evoke emotion. It's what every artistic medium has in common. A horror movie scares you, an action game exhilarates you, a story can engross you and make you feel like you've traveled to a different world, and a good song can make you feel whatever emotion the artist intended. This does also mean that things like propaganda posters and political speeches are art too. A creative expression intended to evoke emotion can still mean many things, and art does not belong exclusively to the righteous. Except, there's one more piece to the puzzle here. Because while it's true that film and animation and prose and music and painting are all intended to evoke emotion, unfortunately, our society can't just leave it at that. The only value we recognize is monetary value. Who gives a damn if you're a genius with a paintbrush if you can't make a buck? So then, that's it, right? Popular art does serve a purely practical function, and that's to make money. Well, here's the thing. While it's true that behind almost every great movie is some corporate boardroom pulling the strings, there are ways to make a lot more money doing a whole lot less. People pay for art because it matters to them. A lot of great art couldn't have been made without financial motivation, sure, but that doesn't mean the people actually driving the projects, behind the camera, writing the book, performing the dance, aren't there to evoke emotion. Or maybe there's more to it still. Maybe the dancer in question is trying to win a competition, or the high school kid behind the camera is trying to finish an assignment. This concession to functionality doesn't undercut our definition so long as we make one tiny adjustment. Art is any form of creative expression in which the primary purpose is to evoke emotion. So that's it then, we did it, we defined art. 2,000 years of debate ended with a single video essay, who would have thought? You know what though? let's see what happens when we just Google it. I'm curious. Let's see. Art is the conscious use of human skill, imagination, and creative power to produce objects, environments, or experiences that communicate ideas, evoke emotions, or bring aesthetic pleasure. Hey, that's actually a pretty good definition. Huh. Maybe this video wasn't necessary after all. Bro, I'm so tired. Thanks for watching. This is my first video in this format, but rest assured I plan to make a lot more, so please subscribe if you enjoyed it. And if you want to see me try out some of that art stuff for myself, you can check out my webcomic Vibrance. It's the story of an alien world in which every single person is born with some special power called a vibrance that represents their soul, except somehow our main character doesn't have one, and he has to deal with the ramifications of that. It's an action-adventure, found family sort of deal, and I've been working on it for a long time with a close friend of mine. You can find it on Tapas and Webtoon. Alright, thanks again.